All right, thank you so much, Tori, for that introduction. And we do want to recognize all of our partners in this project. So this webinar is brought to you by the Okanagan Conservation District, the Washington Department of Ecology through the Terry Hussman Program, and Populous, the Columbia Basin Riparian Planting Partnership. So we really appreciate the opportunity to share this information and to consolidate all the experience that Chris Hoag has gathered throughout the years with his career. So I've really appreciated the opportunity to work with him. So let's see. All right. So thank you for being with us today. This is the third webinar in this series. The first was Principles of Streambank Soil Bioengineering, and the second was Riparian Species Selection and Collection. So if you missed those webinars, or if you'd like to brush up on what we shared, Tori will put the link in the chat for accessing those previous YouTubes, and you can check them out online. So today we're going to focus on bioengineering treatments that are best suited for the toe and bank zones. And we will also refresh your memory on what those zones are. So to start off with, just in general, to make sure that we're on the same page, what is bioengineering? This is applying life science, physical science, math, and engineering to define and solve real world problems. But this is a very, very big field. And so for today, we're focusing specifically on streambank soil bioengineering. And so what is that? Not everybody is familiar. So basically it's just using live and dead plant materials in combination with natural and or synthetic materials to establish vegetation. And the goal is to jumpstart natural stream restoration processes. And we do have a resource that may be useful for you that Tori will also put in the chat. And this is the Streambank Soil Bioengineering Field Guide for low precipitation areas. So it's especially focused on climates like what we have in Eastern Washington, for example, but you will find something helpful regardless where you're working. Okay, Chris.
So let's, we'll talk a little bit about the previous webinars, excuse me. And so what we want to talk about today is the third, and basically these treatments are intended to support and restore natural processes, and they're very dynamic. And they evolve with the stream system as it moves along. Remember, in most cases, well, in a lot of cases, it's not a permanent fix, but you do have the plants will continue to grow. A lot of riparian plants are very good at that, and they can handle quite dramatic problems in the stream system. So here, as a review, these are called riparian planting zones. And when you look at this little schematic, you'll see that it lists elevations from average water elevation, bank full discharge elevation, overbank elevation, and flood prone elevation. And then in the zones, the riparian zone includes all of these zones that are listed here. And you can see the toe zone. This is the zone of highest stress. This is the zone that can be undercut by erosive river currents. And so it can do bad things to the rest of your treatments that you've installed in some of the other zones. And the bank zone is the one that usually has erosive water currents. It has freeze thaw problems, ice and debris. It has the wet dry cycle. All those things affect it. So that's a tough one to plant, but we have more plants that are available there. The toe zone is a problem because it usually has water more than 6 months out of the year. So it's very difficult to plant woody material there. So we generally start moving towards wetland plants in that situation. The overbank zone is just a floodplain, and that has occasionally some erosive river currents, especially at high water. It has ice and debris, a lot of stuff coming down and depositing on that zone, and then freeze thaw problems, etc. So we'll talk about each one of these, the toe and the bank zone, as we go through.
Okay, and since I do teach high school, I just wanted to throw this in there. I had a student in grade 7 who spoke almost no English, primarily a Spanish speaker. And so, in order to engage her, I had her translate some of these terms and phrases into Spanish. And this is just an example of how people of all ages can jump into Streambank soil bioengineering.
Very cool.
Okay, so just so that you know what to expect today, here are the treatments that we're planning to cover. We chose the tow and bank zone as the focus for this webinar based on the survey results that we got from the previous webinars. And so this is based on what you all were asking for. And I'm not going to read these all off because we're about to dive into them. Okay, so in order to install a lot of these treatments that we're going to be showing you today, there's some basic tools that can be really handy. On the left is the water jet stinger, and it is described in that field guide that we shared previously in the chat if you want to learn more about it, or you can contact Chris for more details because we don't have time to go into that today. Another tool that will come in handy for a lot of these installations is simple cotton rope or sisal rope. And we'll talk more about that, but it's just really easy to work with, easy to tighten and tie and cut. And it's also biodegradable. So we recommend cotton rope.
And there are many more tools of the trade, and we'll just we'll hit those as we go through.
Right.
So this is one of the tools of the trade. These are earth anchors. These are engineered anchors. So what that means is an engineer can go through and do designs, and they can look at the at the information at the bottom right and use that in their engineering calculations. And we use these to hold down a variety of different treatments so that the only thing you see is a cable that comes out of the ground. The rest of it all goes in the ground. Next slide. This is basically how they work. In the upper left, you'll see it has a star at one end and a hole at the other, and you put a rod into that hole, and then the guys next to it are using an air hammer to hammer that down through into the bed. And then in the lower right or lower left, you'll see a schematic that shows as you after you pounded it in, you pull out the rod, and then you pull up on the cable with a like a high lift jack, which you see in the right hand side. And what that does is it actually turns that metal piece, and so it provides extra holding power. And this again is engineered, so when you're working with engineers on designs, they can actually go into the data and be comfortable with what it's going to do. In some cases, in some of the streams you work on, drilling a hole into the bed is almost impossible, and it's all large cobbles and boulders, and the bed is just it can be a real problem. So we also use rock bolsters, and basically we're picking out rocks that are based on the shear stress, and we'll drill a hole in it and epoxy in a eye bolt like that, and then we can tie to that eye bolt whatever the treatment is, and we know that that'll stay there because of the size of the rock. Next one. Here's one with the rock bolster actually in use. We utilized the size of the boulders for this particular stream, and then we tied these happen to be brush spurs, but we tied the brush spurs to the rock to keep it there since we couldn't pound in any stakes or anything like that. Next slide.
Okay, so we're going to start by talking about treatments that are appropriate for use in the tow zone. Some things to know about this zone: the most significant constraint in the tow zone really is water, too much water in a lot of cases. And so these are treatments that can handle a lot more water. We're working with species that can handle less oxygen in the soil. And we also have to be aware of the currents. We're working to protect the bank from undercutting currents. We want the root systems to really hold the soil together.
And the other comment on this is that a lot of these treatments are inert, so they don't grow. So you will need to plant with them. So that's something to keep in mind, is that we always want to plant live material in with the inert material.
Right. Okay, so the first treatment we're going to look at are fascines, and this is really great for the toe zone. We'll create and install these in order to protect the toe. And so basically it's just a big bundle of willow cuttings that are tied together. It looks sort of like a cigar or a big long snake.
So fascines are been around for a long time, have been used in Europe extensively. Um, and when you build this, you're putting the cuttings into the arms of your volunteers, and in this case, and you're putting, when you build this, you put the top and the bottoms alternating. And so what you're trying to do is get a even diameter of the treatment all the way from one end to the other. uh, it's uh, it's really a good treatment. It does very well. The diameter of the fascine is going to be based on what types of bank you have and what the situation is that you're trying to fix. Next slide.
Okay, so if you don't have a whole bunch of volunteers to hold the cuttings for you, you can use sawbucks instead to hold the cuttings. It's just an alternative way to build it.
And so the sawbucks really help in that sense, because a lot of times when you have volunteers helping you, you're always looking for more volunteers to help. And so this way they aren't uh, sort of hanging around building the fascines. You can just have several people working on it right there. So when you, again, you're laying the cuttings on there with the tops and bottoms alternating, and then when you get the right diameter, what you're going to do is you're going to tie it. And Julie already mentioned either using cotton twine or sisal rope. And you're going to tie those every 2 feet. So usually it's in between each of the sawbucks. And one thing I always stress with the is that you're trying, when you tie these together, you want to make sure that the bundle is compressed, and you don't want it loose because you're going to be moving it around, and you want it solid. So every 2 feet, you're going to tie it, you're going to double wrap it, and usually it'll have a loop at one end, and you're going to pull the string through the other way and tighten it and tie it off. In the lower left, you'll see that the guy's picking it up. Usually I try to build them about 8 feet long or so. That's really helpful because it fits in the bed of a pickup very easily. So after you're done building it, you throw it in the pickup and move it to the site, or you build it right there at the site, and it's easier to manhandle it down to the water if it's only 8 feet long. Then you'll notice too that the ends are not tied off, so they're very loose, and that means that when you get two 8-footers, and you can splice those together by pushing those loose ends in together and then tying those off. And so that's what it looks like on the right hand side, and you build it the length of whatever the treatment is or whatever the bank that you're working on is. um, you, again, the sizes are the diameter is based on what the stream is and what kind of problems you're working with. The big part of this particular treatment is that you have wood from the stems, and you're going to have a whole bunch of sprouting coming off of there, but you also have the wood to give you extra protection.
Okay, so after you build that fascine, it's installed at the toe of the bank. And these photos show one way you can do it. If you have really soft sediment, you can actually press the stems into the soil by walking all over it. But in other cases, you would need to pin it down.
Yeah, and this one just happened to be, we were lucky in that the night before there was a big storm that went through and deposited a whole bunch of sediment. So we laid the fascine right there at the toe, in between two barbs. And then we just had the class walk over the top of it. You'll also notice on the right that there are several large stones that we put over the top of it. So between the stones and the sediment, we were able to hold it in there without a lot of additional stakes or anything.
Here we're looking at a before and after where the fascine was installed. Really one of the biggest risks in putting these in is that you may put it too low, in which case it's always inundated and the willow will have a hard time growing, or it may be too exposed to currents, or you may put it too high up on the bank, in which case it's too dry.
So in those situations, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll put two, one on top of each other, and that way what we're hoping is that one of them will be at the right hydrology. In other cases, I'll actually put in three, make a pyramid of it, right next to the bank with the inside bundle, and then we'll actually pack soil in between the triangle of fascines and the bank, and then we can plant that with either grass seed or wetland seed.
So there are a lot of different applications for fascines. In this one, it was to protect from wind-generated wave action, but there's a lot of different ways they can be used to protect them.
Yeah, and this one, this was a farm pond that had about 500 feet of fetch. So the wave action was crusting over the bank and causing quite a bit of erosion. So we just threw together a fascine and took it out and staked it in, and we were really pleased with the results, as you can see from this.
Nice. Okay, so here's another tool you can use to treat the tow zone, Coir Logs. Pretty similar to fascines, except for the construction is very, very different. So we're using material from the coconut husk, which is really high tensile strength, and there are different sizes available. It's being installed in a similar location to where you would put a fascine.
So the coir is the name of this particular material, and like Julie said, it comes from a coconut husk, and man, that stuff is tough. It's very difficult to even pound something through it. It's so tough. It comes in various sizes. On the left, kind of behind the names, there are some big ones that are a couple feet in diameter. Over the top of those, there's some 6-inch diameters, and then the big one is usually about a foot in diameter. So you can select those various sizes. They come in about 15-foot lengths. That's how they come in the truck. And next one.
So
And go ahead.
I was just going to say, with Coir, the material itself provides protection, but then when you install plants into it, you get an additional level of protection.
And this is probably one of the biggest selling points for Coir, and is that you can pre-vegetate them. And so this happens to be in Germany, and you can see they just built this big pond, and then they lay the logs into the pond, and so it stays wet. And then, like, this guy is he's not really cutting the coir. He's actually just slamming that metal spear point down into it, and it spreads out, and then you just pop the little seedlings into it, and that's what you can see in that picture in the upper right. And when he's done with that, then you can actually take those to the stream with them already vegetated.
So this Coir log that we're looking at was installed to reduce the wind-generated wave action erosion on the shore. And you see the really long, dead stout stakes. Those are pinning the Coir log down, and then the shorter ones are where the Coir log was protected from the duckbill anchors that were put around it so that it wouldn't just slice right through the Coir log.
Yeah, and again, if you were trying to pound the dead stout stake right through the middle of it all the way down, you'd never do it because it's so tough. So we kind of had to go on the edge and put stakes on either side of it to hold it there. And then as additional anchoring, we used the duckbills with the cable, and the cable came right up over the top of that small stake that's there. And so that again, as it moves, we don't want it cutting through it. In addition to that, once that was installed, and you'll notice that it curves, the Coir log curves. What we're trying to do is match the stream, the Streambank sort of
Contour.
thank you. contour. And then after that, we went in and planted small wetland plant plugs into the bank. And what because the Coir log was able to attenuate the wave action, it allowed a little bit of sediment to deposit, but it also allowed protection for the plants to get growing and continue to grow and protect the bank more.
Very nice combo. So here are some examples of using Coir logs.
So when you do this, basically what we do is on the upper left is you're going to lay out the logs on the length of your bank that you're going to treat. And when you get it, you're going to put out the 15-foot. And then if it's not long enough, if 15 feet isn't long enough, which it rarely is, then what you're going to do is you're actually going to splice it. And that's what she's doing on the right side. And you're splicing it together. So each of the logs, each of those 15-foot sections would be spliced together to get to the total length that you're working on. On the lower left is actually seeing it installed. You'll notice the Coir fabric goes up the bank, and that was seated underneath that. And then the Coir log was placed over the top of the bottom of it. And then you can see the stakes on either side with a tie over the top of it to keep it from lifting. We did add some duckbills in there as a little bit of insurance, so to speak. On this one, actually, we were talking to the Nez Perce Soil Conservation District, and they were looking for a little money lender, or money earner. So what we said was, well, why don't you go through and vegetate these Coir logs? So what they did is they went in and purchased some lumber and some plastic, and built these sort of ponds out in there, by the conservation district office. And then they laid the Coir logs into that, and then they would fill those. And you'll notice that in the left-hand side, you'll see that the plugs are in it, and the wetland plants are growing quite well. And then when they were done and they were big enough, what they would do is knock the wood apart and drain the water out for a day. And then it was light enough when they did that they could throw it in the back of a pickup, drive to the site, and then install it in the water.
Okay, we're going to move on to brush boxes, which are also installed in the tow zone in a similar way that Coir logs or Fascines would be, except for this time you're using willows that are stacked up and held together in a box that's made out of dead stout stakes with, string or wire across the top to hold everything in.
And so the box literally just holds the willows there and allows you to stack it up at a uniform height all the way along. This does a really good job because you don't have the scour underneath that you typically would have with rock. You have a little bit of water that goes through, but and so it keeps it from scouring. And then the height of it is built according to the wave action or boat wake or whatever it is you're trying to protect it from.
This is an example from Germany. They're protecting an important cultural plant that's used over there for thatched roofs. So
this is one that the Germans are pretty amazing when it comes to engineering. And so what they do is they have an excavator on a barge, and they move the barge alongside of this. And they have a post pounder on the excavator, and that pounds in just regular untreated fence posts. And then they pack in the cuttings in typical German efficiency. And then they tie them down over the top of them so they don't float off. Initially, it creates pretty good wildlife habitat. You can see the ducks sitting there sunning themselves. And the Germans are so good at engineering that when they do this, they pack it so tightly that they actually had to put holes like the little opening you see there in it to allow the water to go behind it to water the Phragmites stands that they were trying to protect. So in the lower right, you can see where it has started to sprout already, and it's very successful treatment that they were able to use.
Here's an example a little closer to home in the Coeur d'Alene River, depending where home is for you, I suppose. But this is where a smelter had released lead from its smokestacks, and that had accumulated in the soil of the banks. And so the EPA was able to get a judgment saying that there would be no more erosion in order to prevent that lead from getting into the river. And so that is why this brush box was installed in this location.
So for years, they've been trying to protect the bank and trying to keep as much erosion from happening as possible. They've tried literally everything. And so we came back and we said, well, why don't you try this brush box? And so in the upper left hand, you can see what it looked like as a whole when it was installed. And then in the lower left, you'll see the barge with the excavator on it, and that's how they installed the posts. And then they actually had people laying the branches into it to a certain height, and then tying across it. In the upper right, you'll see that where it's that the problem with the Coeur d'Alene River more than anything else is boat wake. This has recreational boaters going on it every day, almost every hour, all through the day. So that was causing quite a bit of erosion, and they didn't really want to shut down the recreational opportunities with the boats. So they were trying a variety of different treatments. And so this one basically was able to attenuate that boat wake action, and then it anytime you get that attenuation, a lot of times what you do is you'll have sediment deposit on the back side of that. And that's what in the lower right you'll see. And then once that sediment was deposited, then we were able to go in and we can plant that with wetland plugs and build up with the wetland plugs protecting behind it and keeping the bank from eroding further.
Okay, so in a lot of these treatments, we're combining live plantings with inert materials, and a lot of times we're bringing plants on site. So rather than having to grow all of your plants from scratch, one of your options is to actually go out and wild harvest and create either wetland clumps, wildlings that you can bring to your project site, provided that you have an appropriate site to harvest from. And so this can be a real time saver. It can allow you to bring in larger plants that are more matured, that are perhaps adapted to the watershed that you're working in. You just want to make sure you're harvesting wisely. And so as a general rule, if you harvest 1 square foot for every 9 square feet of wetland, that wetland will be able to fill in that hole within 1 growing season. And no one will be able to see that you had worked in there.
It's a real easy way to do it. The wildlings are one of my favorite treatments because you can just dig up that 1 square foot and it fits perfectly in a 5-gallon bucket. And then you pack that to the site with a little water in it. You pull it out and take a little carpenter saw and you just cut it into smaller plugs, and those smaller plugs, then you can extend that out. Rather than 1 plug, you can make 6 or 8 plugs out of it, and then you plant those in about 18 inches apart. And that's a great way to do it, and you don't have to wait for it to grow.
Okay, before we move on to this treatment, Chris, can you make sure that your mic is right in front of your mouth? You were louder earlier.
How's that?
Better, thank you. So next we're going to talk about brush or tree revetments, and this is a way you can use harvested boughs and small trees that are not actually intended to root, but they're physically going to protect the bank or the toe.
So this is a treatment that has been around for a long time. It was originally used in the 1800s in Europe, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, even Germany used it. Hitler made it a requirement that they use this rather than rock or concrete. The best species to use are juniper and spruce. The thing that you don't want to use is pine, because pine generally will drop its needles pretty fast, and then all you have is like a saguaro cactus, so it doesn't do a whole lot to protect it. These are laid out on the bed. The main stem is right on the bed, and they are staked down or held down with anchors.
So revetments provide an initial layer of protection through which you can install plantings. And so you're still going to have a live component. So you're physically protecting the toe, you're reducing the stream velocity, which then facilitates sediment dropping out of the water, depositing in and around the branches. And then this helps build up the stream bank for subsequent planting.
And what you're trying to do is make a continuous line of the dead material along the toe. So uh, when you when you build this, you're going to start at the downstream end. It's very similar to putting shingles on a roof, where you always want to have the top overlapping it, and that will give you a way for the water to go off the bank versus going in between the trees. The branches are loose. You want those just kind of flopping out there. Again, that's the way that you reduce that velocity and allow sedimentation to occur. You're going to tie the main stem to main stem, overlapping by a quarter to a third of the tree, just like shingles.
Okay, let's move through this section just a little more quickly so we can allow time for the other sections.
Okay, and this one, so what we did is we put those together, and you can see the trees are on the bed, and then you'll see vertical bundles, which we'll talk about later on the bank behind it. This is an example of one we did up near Montana. You can see the cut bank that we had to work with. We didn't want to do any excavation there because this is a salmon stream. So we literally cut trenches into the bank, and you can see on the right side, you'll see little tops of the vertical bundles sticking out of the top of the bank. Those are in the trenches. We stake those down. Then we put revetment in front of those. And then 2 years later, you can see on the lower left that the branches have sprouted from all the way from the bottom to the top, and the revetment is working flawlessly in this case, protecting the bank. The only complaint I've ever had with revetments is that I had a lady that didn't want any dead whale bones on her beach. So we had to do a little talking about why dead whale bones were important for invertebrate production.
All right. We're going to move into treatments that are used both in the toe and bank zone that extend through both of those areas. I love these because it just feels like 2 for 1 somehow. So when we're thinking about the bank zone, it's exposed to erosive river currents, wind-generated wave action, ice and debris, wet, dry cycles, all kinds of difficult freezing and thawing, just situations that make it challenging to establish plant communities. So this is where we can plant willows more deeply and put inert treatments in as well.
And this is where we'll plant willows, but those willows need to be species that have flexible stems. You aren't going to plant big ones there. You want to make sure that they're pretty small.
Right. Okay. Vertical bundles are something that Chris has already mentioned, and a really great treatment for going from the toe zone all the way up the bank. They're placed vertically instead of horizontally, but other than that, they function similar to a fascine. Here's a definition: a bundle of willows that lay vertically up the bank so that the bottoms are in the stream bed and the tops are 8 to 12 inches above the top of the bank.
And that 8 to 12 inches above the top of the bank allows the top to get a lot of sun, so it'll sprout leaves and stems. When you build these, you always want to make sure that the tops are up and the bottoms are down, which is different from the fascine in that you're alternating tops and bottoms. And so you're going to stake that in onto the bank.
Right, and the whole bundle will be a smaller diameter than what you would use for a fascine because you're going after stemmed soil contact around the whole bundle with this treatment.
Next.
Okay, So how do you build a vertical bundle? You're going to take just 3 to 5 willow cuttings, depending on the diameter. If they're really small, you might do 5. If they're really large, like 3/4 of an inch or a little more, then you'd just use 3 cuttings. And you wouldn't want like 10 because then you wouldn't get the same kind of stem to soil contact. You're going to put 3 ties on the bundle. One tie is going to be about a foot from the bottom of the bundle. Another will be at the midsection, and then your third tie will be just about a foot from the top. You're going to remove vegetation from the bank and dig a trench that's only as big as it needs to be to accommodate the diameter of your bundle. And then embed that base right in the stream bed so that it's getting hydrated.
And that's one thing I always like to stress is that the bottom needs to be in the stream bed. You're going to dig into the stream bed trying to get down to water.
Right. So once you've tied your bundles together with your cotton rope, then you're going to secure them to the bank with dead stout stakes. And these are just 2x4s that are cut at an angle to create 2 triangles, 2 wedges. And you're going to pound that in so that it functions as a wedge. As you pound it down, it will spread the bundle out just a little bit, creating tension that will hold that bundle to the bank. And you don't want to put it in too deeply because then the bundle might just float right off. And also these stakes do help with providing additional roughness. And once you've got it pinned to the bank, then you're going to muddy it in with slurry of soil and water mixed up and pour it over the bottom 3/4 of the bundle. Leave the top with the aerial parts showing to promote leaves and stems to grow. But wherever you put the muddy slurry, you're going to be promoting root growth. So after you've muddied the whole bottom 3/4 in, then you're just going to use some water to wash over sections of it in a mosaic pattern so that you expose different parts so that those parts of the stem will grow aerial parts, stems and leaves, while the part that's muddied in will grow roots. And so you want a combination. And on the right, you can see one of our bundles that the students installed at Tenasket Creek last year with its new coyote willow growth coming off of it.
One couple of little points is that you want to make sure when you tie the string to hold the bundles together that you tie it tightly. Notice on the first one that the string at the bottom is coming loose. Then also when you get, if the cuttings are not long enough to get to the top of the bank, what you can do is go ahead and stake them in with the bottom in the bed. And then in the top, like that top quarter, what we do is we'll take a little piece of wood or a rock and we'll lift that top up a little bit and slide that in behind it against the bank. And that gives that top more exposure to sunlight and allows it to produce more leaves.
Great. And if you're looking for detailed instructions on how to install a vertical bundle, we're actually making a video right now specifically on this one treatment with a demonstration that students did at the Tenasket Creek site where I'm working with them. And so you can go to the same website where the YouTubes are posted, and I'm pretty sure that we'll be able to post a link as soon as that video is done. It should be finished by Friday.
Plus, I have a paper that I wrote on it that is on my website that you'll see at the last slide.
Great.
So here's another treatment that's called a brush mattress.
Some people call it a brush wall or a willow wall, but we're going to call it a brush mattress.
And this is, again, this has been around for a long time. It's a pretty intensive treatment. When it's installed correctly, the protection is equal to 8-inch angular rock riprap. So that's something to think about. It's typically for stream banks, it's a pretty rapid and immediate protection just from the wood itself. And then when it sprouts, it doubles that protection. It traps sediment so that you get sediment on top of the branches that are in there. The problem is it's very labor intensive and it's very material intensive. And this happens to be in California that we did one, and that's more of a sandy soil. You'll notice that in this one, we have 3 rows of stakes, and you'll look at those and remember that the stake is sticking up. It looks kind of high, but what you're trying to do is pound it down to stretch out the string that you have holding it in there. And so sometimes it's very hard to get it very much deeper. We use that part sticking out for roughness, and that provides more velocity reduction and sediment deposition. This one just shows you the progression of things that are going on there. This is a little bit of snow on there, and there's a lot of snow on there. And then that's what it looks like after it's been installed for 12 months. So pretty effective. It can really grow, but it is very labor intensive, very material intensive. Here's another one that you can see with where we put in the cuttings and then put in a couple of rows of stakes. This picture doesn't show it tied down yet. You'll run the string or rope across each one of those, and that pulls those down. You'll notice that there's a revetment in the bottom of that, and then this is what it looks like in a couple of years. So it really grew quite well and did amazing protection for this particular site. On this one, basically what we're doing is we're going to install a brush mattress on this site. So what you're going to do is you're going to define the extent of the mattress. So how long is it going to be, so you know how much to collect and how much material you have to have with you. You always want to go to a stable point if you possibly can. That stable point in this particular case is a tree. It could be rock, it could be a stable stand of willows, something like that. Then you're going, what you want to go to a stable point so it doesn't flank around the ends of it. Usually these only work for about 10 feet maximum. After that, it's sort of a toss up. You want to clear off the loose material so that you can get the cuttings down tight against the bank. And here you can kind of see on the left-hand side that the slope generally will always be 3-to-1 or flatter. I've installed them on steeper slopes, and we haven't had very good success. So most of the literature now says 3-to-1 slopes. You're going to build a trench at the base and then put stakes in the stream side of that trench, as you can see in that picture. And then what you'll do is, once you put in the cuttings, as you see in the right, you're going to lay the fascine across the bottom inside those stakes, and then you'll stake down the fascine to keep it there. Then what you're going to do is put in the stakes again, 2 or 3 rows, and then you'll use short stretches of string or rope or twine or wire or whatever you're using, and you're going to go up in sort of a diamond pattern between them. The point of the stream is to, number 1, hold it there. Number 2 is to pull the cuttings down against the soil tightly so that we get good soil to stem contact and we have better sprouting that way. Here you'll see that once we get them the stakes in and they're tied down, then you're going to put soil on top of it. And what we're trying to do is kind of get the soil to go in between the stems and cover them so that we get that good soil to stem contact, which generates more roots that way. And then the top part is exposed. We'll go through, and at the end, once we get it all the soil on there, then we'll go through and cut off the top parts. And the best way to get it is use a sort of a watering cannon sort of thing that washes that soil down in between the stems.
Chris, when you talk about cutting off the top parts, are you talking about the top 2 feet where most of the buds are to help stimulate root development?
That's right, and that way too you get rid of most of the small buds that will flush if you get a really good heat wave or growth pattern.
Okay.
This one just shows you on the upper left, it shows them putting the cuttings in. The fascine at the bottom that you see there is not placed yet. It's just sitting there on the stream side of the stakes, waiting for them to finish with the placing the cuttings. The key to this is the cuttings need to be about 4, 6, 8 inches thick. It just kind of depends on how much water it is and Sometimes it depends on how many cuttings you can get. And then the easiest way to tell if you have enough cuttings is to stand in the stream, look back, and if you can see the bank, you don't have enough. So once they're laid, you're going to put that fascine over the top of the bottom of them, and that's going to protect the bases. Another way to do it is use rock. That's the lower right. They used a little bit of rock on the bottom of it just to protect protect the base and keep it from eroding more.
Okay, we're going to breeze through Wattles. Go ahead, Chris.
So Wattles, basically Wattle is a woven wall. You can use it in a variety of different places. The beauty of it is that it traps sediments and offers immediate protection, and you can use them even as spurs or deflectors. When you're building these, basically the stakes are going to be 2 to 6 inches in diameter, and they're going to be 3 to 5 feet long. Again, this depends on the type of stream that you're working on and how much flow you have. And basically, you're digging a trench down a line, and then you're pounding those stakes down so that you get about 1.5 feet sticking up above the top of the ground, and then you're going to put them about 1 to 2 feet apart, and then the maximum height is again that 1.5 feet. You want to make sure that those are pounded in well and tightly so it holds the whole thing together. Then you're going to take in whatever you're using as your weaving material, flexible plant material, whether it's woody or whether it's herbaceous, and basically you're weaving it through the stakes that you put in there already. And as you weave it, you're going to push those down in and so that they're tight across one another. And then go ahead, Julie. And then what you're going to do is you're going to wash them in, and you're going to pack the soil in. So the bottom part is going to be covered with soil. The top part is exposed. And this happens to be a barb that we built into the side of the bank. Here's another one that we did in North Dakota, and we're using an auger to drill the hole for the upright stakes. And then on the right side, you can see where the stakes are in, and then we wove the willow cuttings in between each one of those. And then this is what it looks like. You can see the fascine is sort of middle left and right next to the tree. And it was basically put in to stop a lot of the bank erosion from sliding down and into the stream. So it worked pretty well. We were pretty surprised at how effective it was.
All right, Beaver Dam Analogs. They share some features with Wattles. Beaver Dam Analogs mimic the structure and function of beaver dams, and they can be constructed with a wide variety of methods and materials, combining a post line with woven branches similar to what you saw with the Wattles. BDAs can span all or part of the channel. We're going to start with channel spanning BDAs. Here's some examples of materials you might use for weaving. We started with willow and red osier dogwood and maple. Ended up switching to conifers like Doug fir and spruce. Spruce is my all-time favorite. There's just so much more roughness with those conifer boughs. They've worked really well for creating a broader base, which is what we ended up needing for toe protection. So the post lines are normally woven by humans. This is a project at Triple Creek. If you want more information, you can go to okanaganhighlands.org. This is a project that I managed when I worked for Okanagan Highlands Alliance. But our post lines were not always woven by humans because sometimes the beavers came in. This post line, after 5 days or so after we pounded the post line, beavers showed up and they actually stayed on site for 18 months, and they came in at night and they wove that whole post line on their own and turned it into a dam. That was really fun. So you can design your BDAs to a grade sediment in a way that develops a new planting surface. And that is where we found that having a much broader base, like you can see, it's a pyramid style weave as opposed to a wicker wall. And this is I don't really have time to tell the whole story, but this post line was 4 feet tall. Initially, it was completely aggraded with sediment in a deep incision trench. And then we went in and put an additional post line on top of it. And that's what you're seeing the tops of here. And it continued to aggrade. So it's just a prime location for planting riparian species. I was super excited to see all that sediment build up. It looks like this. I'm going to skip to this slide. So if you look at the white arrows here, you're going to see the top of the same T-post. This is a before and after, left versus right. That's the same T-post in the same elevation in the same stream bank. So a few years later. So that was the initial post line you see on the left, and a really deep trench. And then on the right, you can see how the stream bed has aggraded about 5 feet, and there's a whole new planting surface. Now that we're this close to the former floodplain, that's a good time to look at installing live plant materials. So that's kind of the novel next step, is what do you do with an aggraded BDA? Plant it up, install bioengineering treatments on top. It was super exciting to see this happen, and to be able to create a live BDA. So those were the channel spanning Beaver Dam analogs. We're going to take a few minutes to look at redirective techniques.
So redirected techniques are basically the barb, the vein, the groins, the spurs. All those things are redirective techniques. You're looking at the design considerations. As you can read down through that, there are lots of things that you need to think about, look at, particularly velocities and flood durations and soil types. And this one happens to be at Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. The picture at the bottom right is a way to document what each one of the spurs did. The length of the arrow is the speed of the water. So when it's out more in the middle, which is the top part of the diagram, you can see the links are very long. And then when you get down amongst the spurs, you'll see that they're shortened up quite a bit to even to the point where it's still water. So it's just a way to show what is possible once that's installed. And this one, what we tried to do is use a brush spur. And this is basically built a spur rather than rock. We used willows. And so we used the brush box technique where we put in the frame and then filled that frame with willows up to the top and tried to give us a 10-to-1 slope from the bed down to the bottom. The tall trees that you see in at the ends at the lower end of the bank are clumps that we transplanted to that. And then after this picture was taken, we cut off and left about 3 feet of the clump, and then used everything that we cut off into the as cuttings that were installed in the ground with the water jet stinger. Then you can see on the next picture to the right is the growth that the willows put on that first year after we had a big flood in there, and it was a nightmare to wait for the water to go down to see what had happened. And everything was there and it was growing well. And then after about 3 years or so, what you see is, I mean, the willows are probably 15 feet tall now. So, and we have full protection of the bank. This one just shows how the spurs work. So when the water comes down, it redirects the water out away from the bank, and then it will come back in again up to 3 to 4 times its length. And then you can see the sediment deposited on the bed below the spur. Another one, the spur up above. And here what we did is we actually used Wattle Spurs, and we built Wattles to give us a spur. And then you can see the growth of it on the right side.
Okay, you can also use Beaver Dam analogs as spurs or deflector dams. Similar objective accomplished with a BDA type of structure. Here you're looking at the same structure looking downstream as well as from above with the drone. And this was a channel spanning dam that flanked, and then we continued to use it as a spur each year, adding a few more posts to continue to push the stream out and around to the left to increase sinuosity. And by using these techniques throughout this site, we're able to increase the stream length by 500 feet over a couple of years, and it only started off at 1,800 feet. So that was a significant amount of stream length increase, which slows down the whole system and allows more sediment to in turn deposit. Here's another example before and after, left to right, the incision trench, and then you can see how much the stream has come up with these structures. Then we have post veins.
So in some places, rock is very hard to come by in a stream system. It's almost all sediment. So what we thought about is using posts. And so what they did is cut a bunch of timber and then brought it over and then pounded the timber in right next to each other out from the bank, and then used a chainsaw to create a 10-to-1 slope on it. And it worked tremendously well. And we've used that in many places where rock is difficult to come by.
Nice. Okay, lastly, we just want to talk about combining live materials with rock. Wherever you would normally use rock, we would like to challenge you to ask yourself, is there a way I could also integrate plants? Because it can be a great combo deal. So for example, combining live cuttings and riprap.
Here's another example, and what we tried to show here is the variety of different treatments that we have, and how we were able to get the live treatments or the live cuttings involved in that. And so this was on the Carson River, and we were trying to give it an example to everybody so that they could come and look at this and see what was possible, and it worked out really well.
Nice.
Here's another one. This is in California, and you can see on the upper left where the stream had come up and eroded against the bank and cut away the road. Looks like Yellowstone National Park may need something like this. But then what we did is we laid the vertical bundles down, and that's the circled tops that you see there, and then covered the bottom with rock. And then once it grew up, it literally covered the rock, and you can't even see it in there. What really is nice about that is the rock is there underneath the branches. If you get a big scouring event that comes down, the rock is still under there to help protect.
Beautiful.
This is another one. This is on that same Carson River treatment, and you can see the rock toe is there, but the willows have really started growing through it, and it's sort of covering the rock toe, if you want to use that term, and giving a lot of protection for the bank zone. This is another one that we did on the Little Colorado River, where we put in the rock toe with a brush layer over the top. So as the water comes up, it's protected. The rock protects it, and then it filters through the willows. It's built basically by putting down the rock toe, putting soil on top of that, putting layers of willows on it, watering the willows, and packing in behind with soil. So this one, the same thing. You can see what we did then is we seeded behind it, and then this is the kind of growth we got in the first year. So worked really well.
All right, we hope this has been helpful. This is an example of some of the things my students claim to have learned after studying Streambank soil bioengineering. We hope that you've gotten some ideas of what you might want to do. We do have an evaluation that we would love for you to fill out that will be pasted in the chat. If you could just let us know what you thought, that really helps us to provide content that's helpful to practitioners.
And remember, start putting your questions in to the chat now, and we will discuss what we can.
And here's our contact information if you'd like to reach out to either of us or both of us with questions afterward.
Okay, Tori.
Great. Thank you guys so much. I learned a ton. I wish I had gotten this webinar a couple years ago when I was doing more restoration stuff that I'm doing now. And I am just pasting that evaluation to the chat for everybody as well. Yeah, so feel free. I got a couple of questions. If folks who are sticking around have any others, just feel free to send them my way and I will read them out. Let me see here. So the first question that I have is in regards to Coir Logs. We had a question that says, after you stake it, will a Coir log eventually establish roots in a rock hard creek bed bottom?
Oh, well, of course, the coir isn't going to establish roots. It's the plant you put in the coir. And I think that's what you meant. And it generally what'll happen is that you'll get some sediment deposition on top of that rock hard bottom, and then the roots will spread into that sediment layer. It's not, the roots aren't going to grow into rock, something like that. It's just, as you know, it just is not possible. So generally what we'll do is we'll get that sediment deposition and it'll grow into that.
Great. Next question, and this was when we were discussing vertical bundles. Who sells these bundles in Washington? That's the question that was asked.
There's nobody that sells them. You got to make your own.
So my suggestion would be, if you're writing a grant, include a line item for procuring live materials locally and hire a local person to go out and harvest willows when they're dormant. And then you can put them in a walk-in cooler. You can even ask at a floral shop or a grocery store that has a floral cooler, and they'll keep them dormant for you until you're ready to use them in the spring.
That's a good way to do it. And then we gave you the instructions on how to do that. Again, there's a paper on my website there on vertical bundles and how to build them, and it gives you the details.
And you can also check back on the website that has our previous webinars, because we'll put our vertical bundle video up there as well.
And it looks like somebody added into the chat Salix Solutions in Olympia and Flora Northwest and PDX area. And I don't know if that is just for willow live stakes or for bundles, but for folks maybe on the west side might be places to check out and ask about that.
I guess I could put a plug in for the native plant nursery at the Oroville School District. If you're in Eastern Washington and you're putting in vertical bundles and you're looking for materials, we could have our students go out and harvest dormant cuttings per your specs and provide those to you as part of our native plant nursery. So you could get in touch with me if you're interested in that.
Fun, that would be great. Yeah, and so just your email is the best way to reach you for that, Julie?
Yeah.
Okay, great. That is awesome. I will keep that in mind myself. Those were the two questions that I got. Does anybody, it looks like we still have quite a few folks hanging around. Does anybody have any general questions? Questions specifically for Julie or Chris? All right. I'm not seeing anything. Any last minute things that Chris or Julie you want to address while we still have some folks interested in hanging out?
One thing I would say is that if you can, go ahead and download the field guide. It has a lot of information on each one of the treatments and how to install them and how to collect them and how to build them, etc. It's built to actually in a PDF file that you can just run through a printer and it'll print it out in 8.5 inch sides, and then you can staple it together to get a guide that you can put in your field vest.
Awesome. Great. All right. I'm just trying to give folks, I know I'm a slow typer, so I'm trying to be mindful, but I'm not seeing anything else. Thank you, Chris and Julie, so much. Like I said, I know I learned a ton. Oh, wait, I did. Aha, I knew it. I did just get a question. Who sells the anchors?
The anchors are sold by a number of different companies. The duckbill is sold by Forsyth Industries in Colorado. If you just Google duckbill or platypus earth anchors, you'll see dealers that sell it in your area, and what you can do is you can specify the size of it. It keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then the size of the cable and the length of the cable. So you could do all that according to the site that you're working on. The other thing that we did not cover is called a gripple. And the gripple is something that you can Google. It's a wire rope gripple. It's on the principle of a Chinese finger puzzle, where you put your fingers in and you can't get them back out again. It's the same sort of thing. It's just a little metal thing, and then you run the cables through from the duckbills, and it's a lot easier than a cable clamp. I'll tell you, tremendously easier. So if you're going to do something like that, working with duckbills, I would highly recommend a gripple.
Good to know. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. This was fantastic. And thank you for part 3 of a wonderful webinar series. I wish I had been around for the first 2, because I learned so much just from this one. But we really appreciate you coming out and speaking to everybody, and everybody for attending today. And with that, I will stop recording, and then I can hang out Chris and Julie if you guys have any last things that you want to touch base on.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks all.